nothing existed and make it, a document that clarified some things, it still became an overwhelming document for many landowners. And so we've recently had the Land Mapper tool, which was created, which is a GIS tool that takes geospatial data and allows landowners to sort of plug in their address and get, their stream layers, their parcel, an indicator map, a topography map, and a whole lot of different maps that are helpful for management planning. We thought that it was great to take it one step further. And so we have been working collectively with ODF and NRCS, the Forest Service, Washington DNR, and many others, American Tree Farm, to create to kind of brainstorm what something could look like. And so we have been working on a digital unified management plan, which is ultimately going to create the narrative component of the management plan. So when you couple that with the geospatial component from Landmapper and you have the narrative from this sort of question and answer, we've been calling it the TurboTax of management planning because everybody understands and can recognize that TurboTax takes complex tax documents, turns it into like simple question and answer, and then bada boom, bada bing, your taxes are done. Well, we'd love to see something that could simplify the management planning part because a significant part of it is just trying to glean objectives from landowners. We don't think that this takes away from interactions with the forester, but we hope and we believe it will allow foresters to have more time to provide technical assistance and more tailored field work with the landowner because some of that gleaning about their objectives can be done in advance in a really simple manner. So OFRE has supported startup funding to get this moving, and I've been working with ODF's team and Washington DNR, who are both working on federal grant amendments to pay for the remaining part of this project. And we have decided to work with EcoTrust, excuse, excuse me, which is the creator of Landmapper. But that's kind of a long introduction. Let me know if you have any questions.
Margaret, you might want to let folks know how expensive this project is so they have a frame of reference.
Good. And Dave is also on the committee for this project, so he's well informed on it. Yes, so this project is uh, about $300,000. We've only really gotten the full budget amount, like the proper budget amount for phase one, which is our user needs assessment and prototyping, which is we're developing it very similar to the Landmapper tool, which was developed in two phases, where they did a user needs prototype and then followed up with the full creation of the tool. And so we know that's 45,000, but we've kind of been in communications with EcoTrust that the maximum would be about the $300,000 amount. So it is a big investment for landowners, but at the same time, I think it's a really, really great tool. And if anyone's used Landmapper, they know how, what a game changer it is to not have to go to all of those different websites to, get your web soil survey maps and to get your topography maps. And, we want to make it very user friendly. Dave is our champion for user friendliness. He wants to make sure that, we're mindful of landowners that may not be tech savvy. And so we want to make sure that it can be, plug and play similar to how Landmapper is.
And I think just to follow up on that, the big concern that a lot of us have is that, you look at the demographics of who's involved in this, and we're all over 50 or 60. And so what we want to do is get more folks involved to get their tree farm certified because that's important. And I think that this project will really help propel this if we do it right. I think we have a chance to make people appreciate the properties that they own and how to steward them successfully.
And throughout the process, the tool can make recommendations for cost share programs, for different conservation programs that landowners can get involved in. And very much sewn into the fabric of this program will be education about forest stewardship, We see that as being critical, and like Dave said, we think this could be a really valuable tool for landowners who, want to make something important for their property, but also I just recently completed a training on succession, and often it's kind of cumbersome to look at a large plan that might be in a binder and to hand that off to you know uh, grandchildren, and so there can be a lot of different end products with this, and it could even include a web link so that the next generation might be interested in getting more involved in the land and becoming more of a steward, and it will be tailored to kind of how they receive information. But actually, we had been talking in our last committee that we also see it being something that could be printed, and a hard copy version could be available to the generation that's using it right now. So
Well, that sounds like a very, very worthwhile thing. Could be putting together unified management plan tool that can pull all this data together. Because one of the main inputs we had when we were talking about the department website, for instance, was a way to like have links where you can access different, like you're saying, like conservation incentives and opportunities and things like that without having yourself independently to learn about them all and go find them. So it sounds like a really good project. I appreciate hearing about it.
yes, thank you, Julie. I love an impromptu way to sell that one. She knows I've been working hard on that project, so I will pass it back to Ofri in the room.
Thanks, Margaret. So the exciting thing I think for this project, as Margaret mentioned, is we have champions in Washington who also see this value at DNR, and they're also helping to fund half of that. And so I think that's such a win-win for Oregon and Washington to do this together. And I think it's also an opportunity for collaboration because they work in a very similar type of atmosphere of wanting to have their that are out on the ground, utilizing that time as much as possible for issues. So really great project, but something I think, we'll keep this committee updated on. And I just would hope, this committee could be really supportive of it, especially as things happen at the department to hopefully help fund pieces of that. Those are our, getting into the season of a lot of outreach. So just encourage, we have a lot of publications and different things available. So just a reminder, we're happy at any time to share those and make those available as you're reaching out. And so happy to fill those orders or remind folks as they're going to places that we have materials that are available for them to take. Thanks for that, Jan.
So excited to be illustrated now. So excited for it.
When I got the proof, I was like, I why? Because this is like now you put those as we print it, it's going to be out of the date because things are still changing. So we just had to find when was that right timing, and realize that there's going to be still things happening in the next few years. But really, I think one of the biggest things with putting this publication together was it was not as much as even what's on the page, which is really important, but I think the opportunity, there was a lot of times we brought different departments together to talk about the rules because they were being interpreted in different ways. And so that was a big piece of what we did too, was like one review said one thing, one review said another. It was really evident. And we multiple times, I think in the course of 2 years, we had 5 times we actually ended up having to take a team to the field to actually like on the ground, what does this actually look like? How are you actually interpreting it? And so that's been an interesting part of the process.
And the management planning tool, I mean, I heard about it in a lot of different places, is I think going to be so helpful for folks. We've talked about management planning. I know from my little niche place on this committee, as you know, the first thing that we were asked after the fire was, do you have a management plan? So, I mean, none of us want to like live in a world that yes, there's going to be disaster on the property tomorrow. But I think that's a key piece of just being ready as small woodland owners, and the easier we can make it. And I really love the thought that it can be both digital, virtual and physical, because I also know how often you go to a landowner. We'd love to have you be our tree farmer of the year. And they're like, do you have my management plan? Because they lost sight, like it's the part in their head is still in their head, but the written part had been lost. But the TurboTax idea and having gone through the original version for writing our management plan, it was pretty daunting. Especially for idiots who know nothing, and it is so much better. What Land Mapper has gotten better and better too every time. Although it will always be a challenge, the stream updating, but all these pieces of everything we've talked about today all come together in so many different ways.
Thank you. Thanks for that opportunity to share.
That was really helpful. Yeah, the enthusiasm has to do with the illustrated manual coming out from Ofri and a new tool.
Love that thing.
Yes, yeah. So we were just hearing from Julie and Margaret about that. But so welcome Ben Dumling on the Board of Forestry is our liaison to us and is next on the agenda.
Thank you. Very tall. Now I'm very short. Find the middle ground here. Yeah, thank you for having me. I realized did you send around the strategic plan or the vision?
Do you want me to share it?
Sure. Yeah. I walked out of the house without my copy this morning, so I'm blind a little bit, but I know it pretty well.
You want to look at it on my screen?
If you put it up there, it'll.
I have it up on my.
Yeah, okay, it'll be fine. I know it. So yeah, thank you for having me all. And there are sort of two topics that I wanted to sort of go over and then just open it up for conversation about those topics as well as whatever else relates between CFF and the board. But first of all, the vision for Oregon's forests, I wanted to talk about a little bit. So we have formally adopted that in our January meeting. And so it is now official, formal, it is what it is now. And I feel like while it is not perfect, it is a really good attempt at taking this on. And so I feel really good about it. And I think it's very clearly called a vision for Oregon's forests. It is different than what we had before, which was the Forestry program for Oregon, which was much more of a sort of strategic plan. This is higher level, and it's shorter, it's more concise, it's bigger picture, and it's very clearly a vision. And just to reiterate, one of the other things that sets this apart was this was for the first time, I think, ever, as best as we could do it, a joint project between the board and the departments. And in the past, there's sort of been concurrent plans and visions that the department has theirs and the board has theirs. And there's a lot of overlap usually, but they're separate processes. And this was one where we really tried to do that together. And I think to pretty good effect. Board members like to talk a lot, and ODF staff are very respectful of board members talking, and it's sometimes a challenge to get full engagement from the department, but I think we really did. We had some wonderful folks on our subcommittee. And so the result here, just like it says up there, Board of Forestry and Department of Forestry shared vision for Oregon's forests. And I think that's really important, partly just from a sort of governance process perspective. We should be in alignment. We should be in lockstep. We should have a shared vision. And also to sort of just, hopefully we all can speak as one voice. And that's really my aspiration for this document, is that it allows all of us, and we're connected to the Department of Forestry, through committees, through the board, to really be able to not only speak with one voice, but have this shared vision of where is it that we're going. And I think the department is large, the stakeholder group is even larger. Everyone is going to have their perspective on this, and not everyone's going to agree with everything in there as it's written. But I think hopefully in general, we were able to strike a chord that was meaningful and that tries to be forward-looking, and tries to address the challenges of our time and the challenges of the future of maintaining and building resilience in our forests. I think that really is sort of the core of this document, and making sure our forests are working for our communities and our communities are working for our forests. And yeah, there's 5 goals, and maybe if you wanted to scroll down just a little bit, we could look at the 5. They're not even called goals anymore; they're called something else. But the 5, there's sort of a preamble, the mission, vision, values. But then I think there's the purpose, context, commitments.
The priorities.
The priorities is what we're calling them now. That's right. So there we go. So those are there's 5. Great, thank you. Resilient forests, which, like I said, is really the core of this. None of our aspirations for forests can work if our forests aren't resilient and healthy. And so that really is the framework from which everything else is based. That's we want more forests. It's those if we don't have. And versa, the communities across the state are deeply connected to their forests through a lot of different ways. And in particular, communities for which their economics and jobs are based on forestry, there's a reciprocal relationship there. And you can't do the work to build resilience in your forests if you don't have the network in those landscapes. And so I think we tried really hard to address that reciprocal nature of communities that are dependent on forests and forests that are dependent on communities. Wildfire is a massive crisis and is a big part of any work that we're going to do. Anytime we're talking about forest in Oregon, we have to be addressing wildfire. And that we try to strike a balance of not fire when we need to put it out and fostering and promoting good fire. Forward is going to be embracing fire in a way that we haven't over the last century or more. And for climate leadership, we didn't spend as much time on this. This is a little bit of we copied and pasted our climate change and carbon plan in here. But similar to the wildfire climate work in our forests is critical. Our forests are changing dramatically as the climate is changing. We need to be ahead of that. And as much as we can be leaders in that space and figuring out what climate smart forestry looks like, what resilient and adaptable forests look like, it's going to give us those resilient forests. And last but not least, organizational excellence, which is more a department goal priority than but we are organizationally excellent. And so that's just a broad brush summary. I'd be happy to go into more detail on any of this, but I just wanted to sort of give you the overview of this. The last point I would make is where to from here. And there's sort of I see 2 prongs there. One, the department is working on the strategic plan that comes out of this. How do we realize this over the next 1 to 5 to 20 years? And that is ongoing work at the department level that's sort of out of the board's hands right now. But I eagerly am expecting more clarity on the sort of strategies and tactics to realize these priorities. On a level, this document, to speak with one voice, my aspiration for this document is that it will be shared and read by everybody, and everybody inwardly in the department and outwardly stakeholders in the forest industry and really connected to forests in Oregon, to act as a conversation piece, act as a like jumping off point for discussion, and act as a guide for the department when there is only so many rules and regulations and statutory guidance that the department can put out. Hopefully this can sit in that space as well to help the staff at ODF figure out how to navigate their jobs every day. And so that's a little bit of my vision of where this is going. But with that, I'll open it up to conversation.
Okay. Ben,
Please.
I mean, maybe plan for Oregon, I guess just to kind of make it clear that that was our marching orders. That's how we made decisions for Department of Forestry. So every time something came up, a question or something, it's like, well, can you do this? We have to put it up against the forestry plan for Oregon. I'm not sure if I assume this is going to work similar to that.
That's my hope. Yeah.
And so it's just a kind of a, that's what that's always been. I don't know if a lot of ODF employees understand that or not, but that's kind of, you know, a lot of people ask, well, how do you decide on where to fund programs, or how do you decide to do stuff? It's like it's going to be this document.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully people understand.
Yeah. Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah.
What's the plan for disseminating it? If you want broader stakeholder engagement.
I think I
reading
saw that Joy was on the agenda later on after lunch today.
Mhm.
That's a great question for her.
Okay.
That's in her shop. And she I think is a real champion of this document. She was sort of leading the committee through. And both inwardly in the departments and outwardly. And so that's a Joy question, but there are plans for that, and she could address that much better than I can. But no, it should be spread far and wide.
This is kind of a context question for both either. And it's not a critique, it's actually a context question. What is the expected lifespan of this? Like, it took a while to put together, so I'm assuming it's not like, oh, this will be the vision for the next year, but what is the expectation?
There's aspiration and there's reality. The aspiration, I think our planning calendar actually has us revisiting this in 4 years with a sort of 5 year in preparation for sort of a 5-year reevaluation of it. The previous FPFO would be redone every 10 years. More frequently. And I hope that is the case. Yeah.
Like a management.
Yes.
Let's count on my fingers. I think this is the 5th or 6th rewriting of the FPFO. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Platform.
And I think it I think is helpful to differentiate this. Like the FPFO doesn't really exist anymore. This is something different, but I think it comes out of that. And that was done roughly every 10 years. I think we're at 12 now from the last time, or 13 even now. It was 2011 when it was done
Those
last.
COVID years don't count.
Yeah.
You did all this time.
Oh,
Not target.
But we talk a lot about living documents and being dynamic, and given the pace of change in our forested landscapes, I think this is going to require care and feeding and maintenance. And so I think 5 years sounds like a great goal to at least 5 years, but take a hard look at it, make some changes.
I've read most of the versions. I think the first one came out in 1987. I think it was the first one. And it's interesting, kind of like Ben's saying, if you go back and you read those, they kind of fit the narrative of the people of the state of Oregon and what they think about their forests. So as these were updated, they always went back and saw the people in the state of Oregon say, okay, what do you think about your forest? And that's what went into FPFO mostly. I think the earlier documents were heavy to like timber industry or industrial kind of forestry, and then over time it slowly changed, I guess, over time. So it's always interesting to read on this. Yeah. If you can find it.
So it seems to me a significant shift in a way, because the old forestry plans for Oregon, as I recall, were longer documents, and it's, you're noting early ones were more focused on, fire and harvest issues, I think. And it's changed over time, but were longer and had sort of, more like implement. And now it seems like at the board, and then working with the department, both being
Yes.
high level. And then the strategic plan that the department is working on now will be part of the sort of nitty gritty that used to be inside the forestry plan for Oregon.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting shift.
It is a big shift, and I think
Yeah.
the one of the thoughts behind that was wanting to make it more accessible, because the FPFO is the latest, the 2011 one is 75 pages or something like that, and I'm impressed that you've read them all. Not everybody has, most people haven't, and it's pretty technical, and it's very dry and very long, and this. I wish we could have gotten it even shorter. And I think there's, we tried to bullet it out where, we have our one pager with the summary of the priorities, and then we go down into each priority then has its own page. And so we tried to sort of expand as you read farther down, you can get more and more detail. And so, but in those first 3 pages or 4 pages, you really get everything you need to know so that it's accessible. And tried to be written for not just inward looking to the department and folks in the industry and who deal with forestry on a day-to-day basis, but outwardly as well, that someone from the general public or a legislator who doesn't understand forestry very well could read this and understand what's going on. That was the hope. And to make it as accessible as possible.
And for me, one of the likes about this document is that it's presenting the benefits of forests to Oregonians in ways that can be managed to maximize efficiently those benefits. And I felt like in an early version of this document, it was referring to forests as threats, and it's like kind of the ominous language, which is probably appropriate in some contexts. But overall, I was happy to see that drop out and this more focus on the benefits that we get from healthy forests.
Yeah.
I agree.
Do we have hands up? I can't see the entire group, so if you have comments you'd like
Take
to
that
make.
down
Yeah.
if you want, so I
Yeah.
can see everybody again.
Oh, go ahead. Glenn.
Hi, thanks for that, Ben. This has been an interesting project to follow. I carefully reviewed and was involved in kind of public discussion about the Oregon, the prior plan, the program for Oregon. But anyway, I'm kind of curious how the HCP figures in this. I mean, so the process for the habitat conservation plan for state forests was going along and it was concluded and the plan is out. But to what extent was that plan able to integrate some of the philosophy or what's in this vision? Or were they separate and kind of?
I think in some ways they are very separate. And I think this gets to the rub of what trees we're talking about in this plan. And we very clearly, this is a plan for all forests in Oregon.
Yeah.
And there are layers of influence that the board and the department have over acres of trees in Oregon. And but it's really trying to be a big picture vision for all forests in Oregon. And I think where the state HCP fits into that is primarily a strategy and tactic to meet some of the vision in this document. And it was happening concurrently. It's still ongoing. So there wasn't a direct connection to that work. I think, and there's both a state and there's an Elliott, there's a state forest, and there's a private forest HCP. There's 3 HCPs in process right now on Oregon forests, with varying levels of influence, and various impact on you probably know how many million acres of forest land. I always forget, 4 millions of acres of forest land in Oregon. So I think it sort of sits underneath this document in many ways. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. I know the HCP was, I guess, started before this version of the vision, I think, and also obviously bound up in the endangered species and the consultation with the federal agencies. Just kind of curious how those might have been integrated as things went on with both projects.
I don't know that we were really thinking closely about integrating the HCP into this vision document, but I would, just stepping back a little bit, think that it really fits into the, thinking through those 5 priorities. Resilient forests, it is a tool to build capacity in our forests. It is a tool, hopefully, to support communities in keeping these forests operatable. That's not a right word. Allowing us to continue to operate in these forests and not have them locked up. And it is a tool to make our forests more climate adapted. And I think if you look at all of those priorities, I would argue that all the 2 HCPs that ODF is most involved in, I think, fit in there in direct ways as strategies in meeting those priorities.
Yeah, I kind of figured. I'm just curious your thoughts. Thank you.
Kind of a question to that, since we know 60% is federal
Mm-hmm.
ground in Oregon. Do you as a board have a feeling of how to maybe help develop that relationship a little bit more with federal to get them aware of the vision and kind of that communication lines?
No, and we should. I think the board continues to struggle to find its footing when it comes to the bully pulpit, and we don't have any control over that. But I think we have the ability to speak more loudly about our federal forests. And I see this vision document as a tool in that toolbox. But I think we had a conversation that we have to meet the legislature to advocate for PFA funding. And the process to speak with one voice from the board is cumbersome. And I think that's not an excuse, but that's sort of an example of we can do more to flex those muscles and practice those skills of speaking as the boards on topics that are important. And I think speaking to federal forest policy is one of those. Absolutely.
Well, my thoughts, when we talked about this in the various meetings we had, as the vision was being developed, I remember there was discussion of, what's the next step? Because this being so high level, and then you said today is that the way that's evolved is more like the department will be doing a strategic plan.
Yeah.
And I remember there was something called the metrics and incentives or something like that before. So that's something that, in the implementation level, what it's gonna look like. And I think that if like the strategic plan is what wide vision, it might have a few like short statements about like what Julie's saying, like interaction with the feds on federal forests. And but then probably the meat of that strategic plan will be things within the jurisdiction of the department and broken down into like small forest landowners and other and like high value ecological lands and different kinds of industrial lands and things like that. So it'd be more hands-on. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think one more that reminded me of our 20-year strategy work is referenced in here very much. And I think that's one of our best pathways for working with the federal forests. And that is a key strategy for enacting specifically the wildfire priority, but all of those priorities, honestly.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Yeah, 20-year strategies, like this Forest Service, NRCS, all of several state agencies have all agreed to the 20-year strategy. One of our nexus, or one of our program, well, several programs, we have FFR, which I mentioned earlier, is going to be a key player in that, I think.
I was glad you mentioned the private forest accord and the board seeking funding for implementing that, just big picture, but also that's a component of this because the vision is very broad. And I think the strategic plan, a priority would have to be.
That is absolutely one of these strategies. Again, it's fits a lot of those goals, those priorities. And earlier drafts had a lot of strategies listed out, and those got pulled out of this document, but still exist and are the framework to build out this strategic plan. But yeah, the PFA and the state forest HEP both are key strategies of this. Well, on that note, happy to shift gears to the other topic I wanted to sort of go over was our climate change and carbon plan, the CCCP, which we've had a couple board sessions on that. The last 2 meetings we've had a session on, and I think there's a good bit of engagement from the board of trying to figure out what this plan means and figure out what it's actually doing. It was a plan that we adopted almost 4 years ago now, 3 some years ago, and which really lays out 8 priorities or goals for climate smart forestry in the state of Oregon. And setting ourselves up with forests that are able to adapt in the face of a changing climate, able to mitigate the changes of climate change by storing as much carbon as possible, various forms, and supporting the social and cultural dimensions of communities surrounding these forests. And again, to your point, we put this plan out there and then start asking, well, what's going to happen with it? Are we anything actually happening? I think we've struggled a little bit to realize substantial action on that plan. One of the real highlights I feel like that came out of that is I'm not super familiar with this, but I wanted to bring it up as an interesting case study. It was I call it a work group out of Forest Grove in Washington County that was co-hosted by ODF and the local Soil and Water Conservation District and a number of other stakeholders. to really try to put together a manual, a guide for what does climate smart forestry look like in Washington County, in that little corner of the state. And what are the challenges with the changing climate that we're seeing on the landscape? How can we manage our forests in a way that make it more resilient to and able to mitigate the effects of climate change? And that work is ongoing and has been sort of off and on supported by the departments. And the SWCD is sort of taking over facilitation of it now, but still with ODF involvement. And you probably know more about, I don't know if you know more about that than I do, but that I feel like is a wonderful case study, an example of what I think we should be doing much more of is local groups facilitated by to have these conversations and try to work through on the ground local guidance, suggestions, manual of what does climate smart forestry look like there? Because at the state level, we can talk about the ideas, but it really needs to happen at the local level. And that I think is, and I think there's a direct nexus with CFF and small woodland owners with this work, because you all are most interested and engaged in this often, it seems like. And honestly, the small woodlands on the edges are the ones that are most climate at risk. And so I just wanted to sort of put that out there as a case study of something that I feel like has been really inspiring to see. And Mike, if you got anything else to share on the sort of successes of that and where it's at. And hopefully that can be something that ODF and possibly CFF can support that work across the state.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good case study, and I still have yet to see the product myself, but they're putting together a little kind of workbook, if you will, that should be able to be replicated across the state for other things. Yeah, it was a one-time funding source. Is what we did just to kind of get it up and going, just to see what would happen. And if it is something that we need to pursue, I would need to suggest trying to get it into. I know Danny Norlander does a lot of that type of work. It'd be interesting to try and give it to him, see where he can take it from here on out, see if we can't get funding for that.
Get some more funding.
That's where I
absolutely
where I like to target. But,
yeah.
In terms of sharing information that comes out of those kinds of case studies, I was just looking at Mike's Illustrated Forest Practices Manual for Washington State, because I was interested in looking at what it had in it. An anticipation of yours is coming out. And in it, I thought it was interesting that in places it would say, here are practices that you can voluntarily or on your own accord implement in order to say improve stream quality or ecosystem benefits. And it would say these are not mandated by the forest practice rules. But it could imagine something like that showing up saying climate smart bullet at the bottom, a climate smart way to achieve this result is something where like noting that it's not mandated by the rules. But seems to me that was a good way of presenting some information about just sharing information about best practices, even if they are not mandated by yet. And for climate smart forestry, that could be useful spreading this kind of information that's developed.
Because I think it's very clear. This is not regulation. This is best practices and ideas. But I think that's a brilliant suggestion and model. And as much as that can be incorporated into ODF's ODF's communications would, I think, be super valuable.
And then part of what spun off on this too is that Danny Norlander did get some additional funding to actually put some orchards in. Out at the shorter seed orchard to help expand just beyond Doug fir and cedar and hemlock.
Right.
Yeah. So that did some of that funding did go out there and put some of those.
And thanks for bringing that up. I mean, I think there's a bunch of things that have been already happening through this CCCP, and climate adapted seeds project that's going in at the orchard is really exciting. And the more we can build that, the better. But Dave.
Well, excuse me, I was just going to mention that, we've been learning and doing climate smart forestry for quite a few years. And my suggestion would be that, I was asked to write an article about all that for Northwest Woodlands magazine. And the slant I took was giving people ideas of what they can do. And so if there was a way that ODF, for example, could team up to the extent that they can with OFRI, because OFRI did a great job in a publication recently about forest carbon, but to work together to pool resources to get this information out in the form of, learn by doing examples and, what worked, what didn't work, timeframes, grants available, what the landowner can do. Bear in mind, like you just said, this is all voluntary, but nonetheless, there are many that want to be good stewards of their land and integrate climate smart forestry with still trying to make a little bit of money. And you can do that. And, I've helped hosted tree school classes on this. And so I think if we did it as a team where we could work together to, to solidify and really get out the message of what's really important here and how landowners can do this with little hassle, that I think we would go a long way to getting this effort out. And Christine's work that she did with the Climate Smart Forestry, where I thought was awesome, but a lot of people don't even know about that. So we need to keep reinforcing these messages. As Kate said, you got to mention something at least 3 times before it sinks in. Well, maybe it's got to be more than that,
At least 3 times.
My suggestions.
Yeah, thank you.
I think I'll let Margaret go and then Teresa. Margaret?
Yes, I just wanted to jump on and mention that, as I've kind of been saying, we're working on updating the Know Your Forest page, which is our partnership for forestry education page. And I did actually work with Nate Algenzoff, and we have added a climate smart forestry page to that website that had just simple recommendations for landowners. And it's also kind of a placeholder for any future documents that may come out from ODF. So we've already tried to start incorporating that into that Know Your Forest page. So that's one avenue that might get things out in front of landowners.
That's awesome. And I think Margaret and Dave both, I think what you're showing here is you guys have this phenomenal network. And there seems to be an appetite for more information always, and more topical, relevant information to what's going on in my forest right now. What do I do? And I think these climate smart groups around the state, I think, can help create a lot of that knowledge for you all to share through your networks, which I think is very valuable.
And I kind of tying with everything that's already been said, the one upside for us in like a post-fire world is that we're getting to do a lot of it done. And obviously nothing we're doing would meet the rigors of, we've done a study, because we just can't control for that. But I think there's been enough disaster in Oregon that there's a lot of landowners that are trying a lot of things. And there's a lot of information to be shared. And I think part of it is also encouraging landowners that you're a citizen scientist now. It ultimately is only going to be at the level of anecdote, but it's still useful information in terms of, we planted this for a few years and it couldn't survive. And we tried this and it did. And there's got to be something good that comes out of catastrophe.
You're so right. And I think every landowner is a citizen scientist, and that anecdotal knowledge is powerful. And so valuable.
And the figuring out that combination of the place-based, to having some of those, how do you share some of those failures and successes?
Yeah.
Because I think both of those are often really helpful. What can you do in small lands? And then somehow that needs to then also get communicated or tied into, one of the things I wanted to bring up at the roundtable was the compliance, reforestation compliance monitoring report. And it's like, well, what are all the pieces that go into that? Because sometimes you can get, where are those moments where some of that experimentation now has you in a binary? Are you in compliance or not? Yes or no? In a no place when you're actually trying to do something different or figure out how to deal with some of the impacts of climate change or post-disaster, whatever, on your own landscape. And it's like all those rules and things follow behind. But she mentions all the time, she feels like some of us small woodland owners are the pointy end of the stick because we're kind of stuck with things. Things happen sooner. And it's like science is slow. Regulations and regulation changes are actually slow. But some of those, immediate responses, and I have land that needs to have trees on it. What do I put here? Happen much faster. The number of workshops we went to post-fire where it was like, well, we don't know how to answer this. Like, what do I plant now? We don't know yet. And it's like the same workshops on, assisted migration are helpful if you're not in the immediate situation. I need to know what to do. What am I ordering today to plant in 3 months or whatever? But I think there are so many moving parts. The 5 years, even 5 years sometimes feels like a really long time.
Yeah.
Even knowing the realities of, you can't do things faster, but.
You were so right. And I think there is the knowledge of landowners who've been experimenting on their lands is invaluable. And it's, I know a lot of what doesn't grow in our place, and there's some overlap to your place and some not. And but it's all valuable. And I just yesterday read Dan Kintai had a write up about incense cedar. And, he's got 60 years of info, and none of it's scientific. Right. But I would trust his understanding of incense cedar over anybody's. And it's phenomenal. And we've been planting incense cedar for 25 years in our place, and I completely agree. It's side notes, but but I think that can feed into work groups. Like the more folks with this local knowledge who can populate a local work group who can then put some sort of local guidance that the state is so valuable.
Well, and I think one of the things that seems to be going along, so not an expert, but with climate change and different things, is those differences in different sort of micro regions are getting exacerbated, they're getting bigger. And one of the things that struck us so much when we did our MWM training are totally different animals. But when people talk about Western Oregon, it's like painting this one picture as though it's all our forests are the same. And it's like, but they're not. And that's just on the sense of the wet side of the state. So the more we can, there's so many layers and levels of complexity.
Yeah. Just my hands up.
A quick follow-up here. I'm thinking, like in any endeavor, when you have something and you want to try to do it, you need a big head. You need somebody that's going to be in charge of all this and coordinate this. And if we're talking about, given the how many fingers climate-related aspects have in forest operations, from riparian areas to uplands, et cetera, I'm just wondering if it wouldn't be worthwhile, and this committee might be the perfect avenue for this, for us to explore, if it would be us or somebody else, how to interweave all these different organizations together so that we can put forth a consistent, reinforced, and multi-layered messaging. Otherwise, we can talk our heads off, but not much is probably done. And so, I mean, I can see this in a lot of the posts where people don't have a clue even what organizations' names are, more or less what it is they stand for and what they do. And so I'm wondering if we should talk about that at a future meeting, how we might best do that, because I'd be willing to do what I can to try to make that happen. So.
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just jump into one thinking about, I mean, sometimes because we all are very experienced people in the room and passionate about forestry, sometimes we can dive pretty deep. And I'll say the illustrated manual made me dive deeper than ever planned, but we can get into like, what's the guidance, what's the protocol? And sometimes I'm gonna also remind us, sometimes it's really important that we have all these different agencies, but really that first step is we have a lot of landowners who aren't engaging and doing anything. And so sometimes that, different protocols or different things are useful, but sometimes it's that trying to really help all those folks that are on the ground, like you said, like at county levels or doing things, just trying to help give them those tools to just even get landowners thinking about doing something.
Yeah.
And the like right now we're really thinking about like, what are you going to do out on the ground, right? What is it that you need to do? And I think that's one piece of it, but we have so many folks on the ground who also we just think about like there's so many landowners who we really just want them to do something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you think about like we have this awareness of fire, awareness of communities, awareness of forest health, awareness of resiliency. And so I just would caution us as this body to jump in too much of being too prescriptive, because I think it's very much really, I love this like county by county and how do we use it and do a county. But one thing that I'm just bringing back is like, we're thinking about 76,000 forest land owners that we are also needing something powerful, Dave, that I think just to try and engage them to come do something of these different things that we are talking about. So, sorry, trying to pulling back to that big picture thing, that sometimes that is just as effective as like, what can we get a landowner to do? And I think carbon might, attract some, fire might attract some. So it's in some ways having that toolkit. So those people on the ground, we're just trying to get people to engage in actively managing, which we do with more for.
Yeah. I think to your point and to Dave's point, I think it still takes someone to facilitate and collect and at a local level. And it's more and more ideas out there, I think that has real value, very much so. Well, I'm almost at time. Those are sort of my two primary topics. But if there's any other Board of Forestry related issues that you guys wanted to flag or bring up, I'm all ears.
Always really appreciate you taking the time, Ben. It's super helpful and informative to hear you just kind of distill the conversations that you're having. And I really do like that local approach that you all were discussing. I think it's what we need.
Thank you, Kayla. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thanks for coming in person. It's really nice to see you. Happy New Year, and thank you again for being our liaison with the board, which has really been very useful. So
well,
thank you.
Fingers crossed I'll be around for another 40 years here. So
yeah.
Thanks, Ben.
Absolutely.
Good luck with the next charge for leadership of that
Thank you.
process. Yeah.
We're busy.
I'm sure.
Yeah, that there's thankfully I've been through this once before, and so I have a couple of us on the board now have some experience going through this process, so I look forward to this being an even better experience, a better process this time around. Yeah. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Good discussion the last person before lunch.
Oh, yeah.
Like it was engaging throughout, so thank you. If anyone has an item they want to mention for a couple minutes, I'll look for hands so people could just speak up. Not seeing any, I'm going to adjourn for lunch and we'll be back at 12:30. We'll see you then.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Julie, for your champagne glass. Oh. Hope everyone's had a good lunch. Welcome back, Heather. And our next item is the informing small forest land owners. Joy, that's right.
Thank you so much for having us. For those of you I haven't had a chance to work with yet, I'm Joy Krosnick. I'm ODF's Public Affairs Director for a handful of years now. It feels like much longer. And with me is Karen McGlone, and she's our public meetings and event outreach coordinator, which is a position we were finally able to secure last biennium and get in place. So some of Karen's key work so far has been working on coordination and kind of thematic grouping of our big outreach events, in particular Tree School and Logging Conference. As a result of that, this year's theme for both events is going to be reforestation and getting the word out about that. So we're really excited there. But the other big project I wanted to share with this group that Karen's working on is, I think the best way I've heard it described is like a welcome to the neighborhood packet for small forest landowners. To have a nice, concise yet robust array of initial resources around incentives, around technical assistance, even things like forest health topics, and not just specific to ODF, but also sharing partner agency materials. So there's something that at outreach events or when our foresters are out talking with folks, there's a leave behind that the desired action would be future contact for more details, for actually getting assistance with the SFO foresters in their areas. So Karen's been working with SFO program staff to identify kind of what materials go in this, what kind of formats do we provide it in. So it's really that very first initial touch point to let them know there are resources and assistance out there and you may be eligible, and here's how you go to that next step of getting more information. The reason we're here today with this lovely group is just to put out the ask for sharing of, and not necessarily in this moment, but Heather has mine and Karen's contact information, but organizations, distribute any broader that you're part of, you may be aware of, because we've been working with OSU Extension and OSWA, but we want to be able to get that out more broadly. So definitely looking for any networks, touch points folks are aware of. I know Karen's tracking things like Farm Bureau. Hey, if we provide you with, a quick email, would you send it out to your members, to your distro lists, to help connect folks with this information and start getting to more of the audiences that we haven't yet been able to directly connect with. Karen, was there anything you want to add?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you. It's nice to meet all of you. And I know that there's a lot of good ideas out there about communicating further about the SFO program. I met earlier this year with both Jesse and Lori and also Jennifer Ward, who handles some forestry issues. And I understand, from what I understand, there's kind of two camps of SFO folks, the ones who are well integrated into the forestry community, and they're probably your members. And then there are the individuals who somehow have forest land, and whether they inherited it or had this dream and so managed to purchase some, but they don't know a lot about forestry, nor do they know much about the resources available to them, as well as the groups that are there to help support them. And so in working both on the packet that Joy described, as well as learning more from Jesse and Lori, I hope I have the opportunity as we move forward to start exploring new ways to reach out and help maybe all SFOs, but also how to connect better with the unattached so the ODF and the SFO program has to say and how we can help them. So, yes.
Two things right away. One, awesome. One, if you figure that out, how we connect all the disconnected. I think that one comes up on this group all the time. Like, how do we do that? So if you figure it out, that'd be great to know. The other one is, did I hear that a part of this is not just ODF specific information, but other organizations that are support structure? Because I mean, and mostly that makes me excited thinking, I'm assuming obviously extension agents, and OSPA and Oregon Tree Farm System, because that's reaching out to folks at all sorts of different levels.
Yeah.
And I mean, I haven't brought it up yet, but even at our tree farm system, we're starting to think about a backyard. We're not calling it that, but for lack of a better term, like a backyard certification, something that people could sort of exploring, potentially self-certify for the folks under 10 acres, because you have, as a tree farm, actually always seems a little farmers, it's really family forests, but highlighting that real dedication to wood, water, wildlife stewardship overall. But we're kind of like knowing that there are those really the real littles.
Yeah.
And we feel little at 39 acres because we fall under every category for anything and whenever anyone ever being interested in us. But the littles, they count too. And also have rules to follow that they may have absolutely no idea, as they like to sort of do bird piles when it's not fire, when it's fire season or whatever. But anyway, would love to have tree farm included and make sure OSPA's included, and then I love the idea of a welcome to the neighborhood, because we've talked about that kind of thing, that there are new people moving into forest land ownership all the time.
Right.
And I know that from just the few people we know who are realtors who deal in forest land. And there are a few of those where it's really specifically forest land. More and more folks are moving in that are really interested in primarily recreation or primarily sort of conservation stuff. That's our younger crowd that aren't just all us old people who can afford to buy a little patch of forest land. And aren't the kids that are maybe inheriting it, but are folks that are still younger, but not, they have different sets of values. And how do we pull them in and go, you're part of this family too, and it's a big tent. So, and I think that one always feels so hard. It's like, no, we all have different values and goals, and the management plan templates for you too.
And I've been with the agent all of 1 year and 4 months, and so I am very much learning both. Umbrella. Yeah, it's a very, very large umbrella. Sometimes it spins. But would love the opportunity to pick the brains of you folks, because you understand the connections and the opportunities. I've thought of some opportunities, but like when you mentioned realtors, that one hadn't occurred to me. But I know that, small forest land owners trust their lawyers, trust their financial advisors. And so those two are audiences that I think are important to communicate with. So I'm hoping that I can use you as a resource as much as hopefully you'll be able to
previously.
And I always think that on county levels, your tax assessor's office, because they send stuff out all the time.
And actually, Mike and I talked about this
Just have
recently,
that conversation.
because, so the super quick version is past life Department of Revenue, they state, and when we had some big tax thing like, oh, we're changing how you calculate your withholding. It wasn't enough to just, hey, it's tax filing season, hopefully you remember this thing, or Happy New Year, change your withholding, and it's just a terrible barren process now. But we would just put just a little like quarter sheet of paper, and there's a whole process to get it printed and stuffed into those. And you could split it by county or type of land ownership when you wanted to, and it felt like it was really effective. I like to think because it was brightly colored, it was.
Outside agencies. Okay,
Thank you, answered one of my questions.
I see that Dave Bugme has his hand up.
Dave.
And just two broad things. I think first one is other organizations to reach out to for those that do participate to some degree and do have cross-linking is the basin councils. So as former chair of our Clackamas River Basin Council, we do a lot both with rural and urban forest land. You could get to both urban forest crossover programs. And so I think that would be the first thing is to explore basin councils across the state. The next one would be the local conservation districts, soil and water conservation districts. For example, the Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District has their Eagle Creek Community Forest. And so they have tours out there all the time for the general public as well as other folks. And so that would be another avenue to reach folks. And then for those that are unattached, to the everyday goings on, what Glenn and other OSU extension agents do, where they release their newsletters, is an awesome approach. He's got a huge audience of, I think, 5 or 10,000 people, and so there would be something there to pursue. And then I thought of the same thing that was just talked about regarding the tax assessor's office. There's one piece of literature everybody has to get. And so I don't see why, even with the bureaucracy, why you can't create some sort of a system where you can just put in a little flyer. I mean, maybe Estacade is a small town, but we do that all the time with our local phone company. They put in flyers for nothing to do with phones, but as long as it's factual and in the public interest, they have no problem putting that stuff in. So I think that should really be explored. So that was my 2 cents.
Karen, she's not here, but she talked about earlier about kind of doing some similar with like some social media campaign. And one of the things I suggest, so many of us in here are part of the Partnership for Forestry Education. And ODF has several folks who attend that. We have a meeting coming up in February. And so the power with that group is you get like OFRI and ODF and OSU and several others who are doing this. And one of the things we're really trying to do is also help provide these type of resources to the trainers. And we see a lot of new folks, like how you have a lot of new SFO. We see that throughout a lot of these different organizations. And so the power could be is if you have a theme like reforestation this year, we all could help through our social media or things build things that we're all doing similar messaging together.
Oh, that's great.
So if you're going out with something, if other agencies are aware that's going out, because whether ODF goes out with it, inevitably OSU is going to get a call about it. OFRI's going to get a call about it. Like, the fire map goes out and they call us. And we're like, that wasn't us. Let me give you the person. So the nice thing is if you can get these group of people who are the providers who are out on the ground,
That's what
I always just suggest like those are the people who I'd appreciate in some ways are your first stop of education of what's happening because they're the ones that are working with the landowners,
right.
But they're part of your network out. And so I think there's a real power there and the partnership could really help with that too. And the other thing is we do have a publication that we put together a few years that is a who's who of all of these different groups. And so like ODF has a full page. We have updated with the SFO office where they have a full page in there. So there is a publication that has, so what does ODF do? What's OFRI do? What's OSU? A little bit of that who's who. And we've found it really effective again for all the new people who are coming in to help landowners, help them get to know who's doing what. Because,
Sure.
right, that's the power is you want to get to the landowner, but you also, those people they're going to call or reach out to, if they're aware of what's happening, that'll just help, I think, help it be even more effective. So Margaret is supporting that, but you have a lot of folks here at ODF who are part of that group. And I think if you wanted to come talk to the group, they're all going to be in the same place at the same time, which is helpful in February.
And I think Tim is on it on the ODF public affairs. Okay, great. Great. I know we were booked for 10 minutes and we've taken, well, at least 15, if not more.
So one more question is actually Ben said, oh, this is a Joy question. Cause I was just here. Cause I was curious about the December.
Yes. So in the next few weeks, it will be on the board's webpage. Our initial focus is because it does change for the first time in a long time. The department's mission, vision, and values. We have a really robust rollout internally of, getting folks more familiar with it. They've seen different parts and provided input on different parts throughout the process, but to actually see it all together and really start internalizing that and seeing how it applies to their work and how they can continue to apply it to their work is the initial focus. And then there'll be a broader push externally to make sure that, we start pushing it out there and people get questions. It's like, oh, well, I actually don't know what that value means. Hopefully they're plain language enough that everybody gets it. But what I will say is that the new mission, vision, and values are all still very ODA in a good way. The connection between all the different types of work we do and the role all of that has in protecting and preserving Oregon forests. And also on the value side, really anchoring into the things that have made ODF a great organization, for over a century around relationships and partnerships and collaboration. And so I'm really looking forward to building that out internally. Externally, because there's a lot of work. A lot.
Just a little bit, we did kind of were aware. Is the plan to have it primarily a virtual thing or printing some of them or?
So actually, we're still figuring that portion out. A lot of it depend on demand, so we'll probably do similar to, I don't know if folks have seen the 20-year strategy booklets, laying out kind of, this is all the important work that's happened and this is the foundation of that strategy. We're thinking of an approach similar to that of where there's a small run. And then if folks are like, I really want to get my own. Okay, so we can print more of them, not where we end up with 20 boxes of overstock and like, hopefully we hand it out over the next, 5 to 7 years.
That feels like something that would also be an interesting part of the welcome to the neighborhood, like here's the flourishing. I'm curious in your about your elevator speech about what you want to say to this community, like when you're trying to find people who are not engaged yet with sort of the small forestland community in terms of why
plan or something, well, that might mean some people, not others, that if you're saying, we can help you maximize grant funding for restoration along your streams, that'd be another thing. And I'm just curious what you're thinking for your initial float to the community.
So I feel like the two sentences, the opening would be the importance of Oregon's forest lands and keeping them healthy and resilient just across the board. And actually, the second part would be very evident in the packets themselves, because our intent is to gather those initial introductory resources of all aspects of, do you need help with harvest plans, or are you interested in conservation? Do you need, additional funds to make this work possible? And kind of delivering that whole world of information in a very high level and digestible format. Because I would imagine that there likely are, to say, a lot of the much smaller forest landowners who, whether they've inherited it or just purchased it, they don't actually know for sure what they want to do with it yet. So giving that whole world of, you have all of these options and you can mix and match and do all of these things and, meet that big picture target of sustainable, healthy forest lands that remain as forest lands in Oregon.
Because actually, I was thinking when you asked that, Steve Caparata has always said that, in all his years of doing tree farm certification visits, that the one thing in all the variation of goals, that management goals that landowners have, the one thing that every one of them has in common is they want a healthy forest. That forest health is huge. So, I mean, that can be what that means, and what you want to do with that is different potentially, but that baseline is so that health and resilience, which also ties right back into the vision.
Yep.
So, Teresa, and I'd say even one step back would be the folks who don't realize they've purchased a forest property and that that's its own thing. And there are realtors who have no idea, who don't know, or who do their best to obfuscate that fact. Because we've read some of the ads and you look and there is nothing that says that, yeah, you're never going to build on this, or you're never going to subdivide this, or this is actually a forest. And if you're somebody who's going to go through all the paperwork, I am not one of those people.
Yeah.
So I feel okay saying that there are going to be some people who find out that owning a forest is a little bit different than, oh, we have all these acres now.
And it has trees. Oh, isn't that?
Yeah, but yes, there are responsibilities. And here's this whole community that's happy to help you learn what that means. So I love the welcome to the neighborhood, because that is, I mean, that's been so our experience has been being welcomed into this amazing sort of forest sector community, but we wouldn't even known how to put those words together when we first were part of it. But yeah, we did just see a listing. I mean, we were just with part of some friends just buying property, and literally there was nothing that talked about that property as a forest property, and it was 40 acres of forest. So if you didn't know what you were looking at, so I think, and there are a lot of, Gary brings them up a lot too, our 10, 15 acre people who, it's just their backyard. But they don't know that but they're now part of the forest landowning community in Oregon with, an amazing gift to give. Because I mean, like you keep highlighting, the gifts that we all, the goods and stuff that come from forest land ownership. It's like we're offering really something awesome to the state. And maybe not even, so there's that responsibility, but also this like, wow, this gift you're offering.
And I think, Halo, I was just gonna also follow up that you also now have full staff of urban and community forestry.
And so it's not just the SFO, I would also, because a lot of our small landowners see themselves in maybe both lights, but may actually relate more to the urban and community forestry because they're up on that fringe. And so I went
also just center it on your SFO office. You might also see about like what they might be doing in partnerships, and I think that's what Kayla also mentioned. And then the last thing, just remember this is an advisory group. So I would even encourage, if you have something you're gonna send to thousands of landowners, this is a great group to send it to first and be like, how does this bounce off of you?
What are we?
As landowners, or like there might be some words that just doesn't resonate with them. So I just encourage you to use, if you're going for a big swapping type campaign, to also use this group as advisory for that.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, to me, I'm sort of hearing like partners in stewardship is really what you're thinking if the department is being, which brings to the landowners the assistance in stewarding the land well, and brings to the department and the people of Oregon the benefits of having well stewarded forest land.
I know that when I first started, last year was just, I started in October, and it's like it was just a month or two later that suddenly we were jumping into logging conference. And that was my first experience with it. But what I learned through the process was how different all forest land owners' goals are and what their plan for their land is. And I suspect that new forest land owners who aren't aware that they now own a forest might be embarrassed that they don't have a goal to, all planned out and mapped out, or that they don't know the terminology, et cetera, et cetera. So I think also emphasizing how each landowner has a different goal or set of goals.
And that it's,
So that ODF works with them.
and that it's okay that
Their
you
goals.
don't.
Yes.
I mean, I still have the list of questions we asked the realtor before we bought ours, that actually the fact that he didn't laugh us out of the room was kind of amazing. And the first one was literally, are there any responsibilities related to a forest? I mean, and we at least knew to ask that,
Right.
but we knew nothing. And that was only 5 or 6 years ago. So yeah, it's like, I don't know that we're that unusual, other than that we kind of jumped into learning stuff. But yeah,
No, you're not unusual. There's not many landowners. I've been on landowners that purchased land. Same situation.
Well, I was gonna say, I have a similar list of questions I asked when I started at ODF, and I look back at that list and go, oh, well, that's embarrassing.
yeah.
I'm not gonna do that out loud. Like,
Yeah.
that's a blasphemy. How do you use that?
Oh,
And for what?
It's a question I repeated just the other month when she brought me into the office.
Full term, or that's tour.
I'm gonna look up there, I see a hand raised, that's Dave Bugney.
I was just thinking if we ought to have a data reality check here, and what I mean by that is that if there are 70,000 or so small woodland owners in Oregon, and if OSWA and OTFS maybe represent, say, 1,500 or 2,000, whatever the number is, and it would be interesting to know, how many unique hits does ODF's website get, from, if there's a way to track that. So what I'm concerned about is that, a lot of times you're just preaching to the choir, and how do you reach out to the other 60 or 70 some odd thousand people that aren't members of OSWA, that aren't OTF members, that don't go on the ODF website, that probably don't even know it even exists. So that's why I was suggesting something like the property tax statements, or whatever you guys want to come up with that reaches a broad audience, a newspaper. Well, nobody reads newspapers anymore, but I mean, if there's some way to do that, otherwise, I think a lot of this effort is really not being maximized. And so one thing that I've started to do now is we are starting to collect some data, myself and the Coferadas, and I've reached out to PSU to try to do some sort of demographic study to look at the number of landowners that are members of these organizations versus the total number of landowners that are small woodland owners by county. And so that way we could see, for example, the work we've done so far, there's some counties where there are no members of OSWA or OTFS at all. And so, you know, but then there's others, particularly in Western Oregon, which is more represented. But, you know, Eastern Oregon needs to be represented as well. So, you know, we need to find ways to reach or broach that gap, you know, because I just otherwise I don't think it's a lot of this effort might be wasted. So
I remember when we first bought our property, it was part of it was enrolled in the small tract forestland program, and we got a totally inexplicable letter from assessment and taxation, and essentially, mostly it was just sent us a check. But I didn't know, and there wasn't really anything about how to find out more about what this even means. Is, you know, do you want to do this? What are the, so people either new forest landowners or something related to taxes could be really useful. Because I think we also just got one that was about reforestation requirements or something that was like also still kind of totally disconnected from how you found information about it, really. And I don't know that I trust Lane County to send out information that is actually accurate anyway, based on some experience of Lane County. But that could be one way.
What was that from the Internal Revenue Service?
It was from assessment and taxation and from the county. Because STF does connect more to the county, but it's like, but the counties all sends, I mean, tax stuff goes out every year.
Yeah.
And and as we were saying, that does go out on paper. So you don't miss the people who don't access their stuff online or don't click on things.
Yeah, Dave, you're absolutely right. We know how to connect with the very involved folks who are already members, already going to our website. They already know initially how to connect those dots and get to the next step to get the information they're looking for. So it is absolutely about how do we reach the broadest swath of small forest landowners and not just, you know, preaching to the choir of small forest landowners who already know these things or know where to find them.
I wanted to ask about the special assessment for forest land. Do most small forest landowners, are they aware of that? Or is it something that when they buy the forest land, it's simply already in that assessment and it continues? Because it would seem to me when we're talking about how to reach people, that would be one way if they were applying for that deferral. I mean, usually if you buy forested property and it's already in the assessment, there's a discussion of the fact that if you stop using it for its use, you have to pay the catch-up amount. So I would think that would be a threshold at which people, nerdy tax people like me anyway, would say, oh, wait a minute, there's something here I don't know. And it might be a medium for you to communicate with people like through this tax issue. That sounded all sensible. Mike's wrinkling his forehead a little. So maybe what I said doesn't make sense, but for me, like doing transactions, I bump into this because if it's already in the assessment, you want to make sure it continues so you don't have to pay the catch-up bill. And if you're buying land and you're putting it into use, then you want to get the deferral. Thoughts?
Well, it sounds like we have an opportunity where that I really did not think would arise, where things I remember from Department of Revenue days will actually cross over into something useful now.
Yeah.
I figured other than harvest tax, that would be pretty much it.
Yeah. Dave has his hand up again.
I was just going to chime in that, you know, we owned 5 different tax lots, and each one came with the typical forest land deferral. But then there's a small tract forest land program, and each one, it depends on your management plan. What are your long-term objectives? Because one will be more cost efficient from a tax standpoint than another. And so I don't think you can make a broad statement one way or another. But what you can say is that there needs to be better education among the forest landowners about the programs that are available and how to maximize your tax advantage, because one may be more appealing to another depending on the individual's needs. And so that would be my answer to that question.
Glenn?
Yeah, as you might imagine, like many of us, you know, OSU's often wrestled with the question about reaching the ones that we're not connected with, and particularly the new forest owners or the unengaged. And this issue or this opportunity, if you will, to work through the assessment and taxation is something that we've explored. And it is something that we've done and that you can be done where you work with most of the county assessor's office have somebody who specializes in the farm forest assessment and the communication with landowners, and they're usually the ones that send people to ODF and to OSU with their questions about their forest land tax status and how to maintain it. But it is probably an option. It does vary a lot county by county as far as it's not something we could just implement statewide. You have to approach each tax assessor's office, but they do often, in my experience in the counties I've worked in, they have personnel that are tuned in and listening. And if we had like even a postcard or an information piece that went with the tax statement that was directed at people that had a forest land classification, that could be effective, just like the messages they'll send about when a property owner gets a statement, if they've got the small tract option, they'll send this letter. Maybe we could help make that more useful. But anyway, that is an opportunity, and we've looked into that before. But it does require a communication campaign and developing personal connections with each county tax assessor's person who works in that area.
And let's follow up on that. Dave mentioned about effectiveness, and there are some campaigns that have been done that I think you could look back at effectiveness, but again, it's been a very kind of county or area region. So we've set up things like My Blue Mountains, where you have an agency like Allow Resources who's managing that campaign and who's developing those relationships with landowners. My Southern Oregon Woodlands, it's a very similar, the Klamath, Forest Trust. So OFRE's help fund this very similar, like reach everybody in that area. But one of the things that we have found most effective is it linked back to a person or to a group that was in their own community. And so this is one of those where I think, as Dave said, what's that effectiveness of just reaching out? I would encourage you to also look at some of these successes we've had in Oregon, because this is a costly to go out and do this type of thing. And what OFRE has seen is those type where they're tied back to a local resource, because people then, it really feels like, oh, this is a hello from my neighborhood versus from Salem. Salem sometimes is a tough to feel like that's my neighborhood. So I would just encourage to look at some of those successes, because you do have SFOs across the state. We have OSU, we have others who are in communities across the state. And so I just encourage looking at some of those successful campaigns where we've reached out to every single landowner in a county. They saw success rates, I think, because they were connected to the persons and people who were also in their community, who were there and available and didn't just hit it one time, right? They saw it, and then they saw a neighbor that got that, worked with that partnership, and then that neighbor. So there are some already, I think, really successful examples of that out there that I encourage you to also take up. And the department's been involved and has people involved in all of those. Northwest Oregon has always been a little bit of a different, just because of the vast numbers. But again, you have people in those different communities. So just keep that in mind of some of that success we've seen. And we'd be happy to talk more about that. But just really applaud the outreach, but also know that there's been some of those type of efforts. Like Lynn and I, this 25-year career of trying to reach the unengaged landowners. So we applaud anyone who keeps trying at it. But I do also, and I'm just going to say again, because Jesse said it, I do think we have in social media campaigns, we've also seen some success there of reaching people who are engaged with, like kids that they're, not kids, but like 18 to 35-year-olds on certain platforms. But we are seeing, so OFRE does a lot of work on this, especially Facebook. A lot of parents and grandparents are engaged because they want to see what their grandkids are up to. And you can really target that as well. And there was a campaign a few years ago that was also ODF was a part of, where we did that in an area. And they turned on this switch and said, if you'd like a forester, let us know.
And they had to turn the switch off because they were overran with calls for a forester because you only have so many foresters that only have so much time. So it kind of was this like booming success. We couldn't meet the need we put out there. So just trying to give you a little bit of history here in 2 minutes or less of like, we've done some of these. Some of them have been great. Some of them we weren't quite ready for what we set out to ask for. So I'm looking at Mike because he knows he's been through some of these too. So we'd be happy to talk more. Full encouragement. Just wanted to also glean from some of our history of doing similar work.
Absolutely.
It does seem like something sort of new is the amount of outreach and discussion of funding from fire. So that I'm not at all sure where that would fit in here, but that is another sort of expanded area of need for communication, and unengaged people might be at this point be concerned about protection from fire, about, fire funding, and also about insurance. Even if the department can't do anything to certainly solve the insurance problem, people might be interested in finding a community around that issue.
Just even one other suggestion is that, especially for rural landowners that are skeptical of everything, if you, who are you going to talk to? When you want to learn something, who is it usually you go to see but your neighbor, especially one that you might trust. And so, OSU Extension has done a great job over the years of developing programs like Master Woodland Manager, and OSWA has their Good Neighbor Tours, which are funded partially or totally by OFRI. And so if there was a way to maybe infuse some more energy into those programs, not just money, but human energy to get, and when I was on our school board, we used to have a group what we call key communicators, and they were folks in the community that would go out and dispel all the myths about your public school district. Well, the same thing exists here. It's no different. So if we had a group of people geographically oriented around the state that could serve that purpose. It's not going to be 10, it's going to be 1,000, or whatever. And so, but I would suggest something like that to help talk to people, to get them to go to the ODF or wherever the information is. And I've done that as part of these Master Woodland Manager things, OSU Tree School, whatever it's been. I've tried to be an advocate to get that information out. And so I think more of that needs to be done as well. And that would help a long way. And the other last thing is that I can think of is focus groups with people under the age of 60. Just get somebody, just get a group of like our kids, they're in their late 20s, early 30s, and, they need to learn more. And if you could get a group together and say, okay, what do you guys listen to? Is it this Twitter or tweets or Instagrams, whatever, Snapchats, whatever they are, and go on these sites and develop something that's not corny, but find out what it is, what appeals to these people, what turns them on, and then create ads accordingly, I think would be great.
Other thoughts? Thanks everyone for all of your contributions, and Greg Berger for being here today. I hope you'll come back.
Yeah, it's like so avalanche too in thoughts and ideas. We love it. Yeah, I was just going.
Usually we're the only ones in the room getting all excited about that.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for nerding out with us.
Thank you. Thanks for being so much. The next topic we have up is upcoming meeting items. We have a couple in the from Keola that she posted in the chat. And I'm sure others have ideas as well. And like I was saying, it's we have fewer meetings now, like getting concrete about who we might like to have come and speak would be handy. They give some more lead time in terms of setting things up. So I'll leave it at that for the moment and see if people want to speak about specific requests or what they think about Keola's ideas that are in the chat.
The For service program presentation, we can always have Lori. Sorry, I'm moving around a pamphlet that Lori's put together of incentive programs for small. Like, AFLP is Forest the Legacy Program. It's geared more toward larger landowners, like sizes. Those who can participate in landscape or legacy programs. It would be an interesting topic. I'm not sure how many small woodland owners can actually apply for it and put in for it, but if you're interested, we can. Which is stories as well. But it does, it's, you know, I guess what it is it's to keep, it's a program designed by the Forest Service to prevent development of forest land and keep forest land.
Haven't we had it?
We've had regular updates on the Forest Legacy Program, right?
Yeah, because there's.
We've had like maybe once every year and a half or something like that.
I'm intrigued by the nature, I assume that's the Nature Conservancy. Yeah, it's like, what is their relationship? And I don't even know, is there a relationship they have with small forest owners? Or where, or what might that look like, or?
Glenn and Dave are both waving their hands. Well, Dave, Bugney, because you're waving your hand.
Glenn had his hand up first. I was waving my hand saying that any relationship with the TNC with small woodland owners is probably tenuous.
And Glenn?
Yeah, actually, I was just comment on Kayla's recommendation. Well, Jeff Gersh and the small forest owner issues, and I've been talking with him a fair amount. And he's real active in Washington as well with the Washington Farm Forest Association about the issue. I think was referenced in some of the other materials for this group of the loss of family forests or small forests that are going out of private small woodland owner into some other ownership category. And when you look back, I know that OFRI, Julie, you're kind of familiar with it. You start looking back at the data, and by some accounts, there's been maybe 25% of the small woodlands in Oregon have gone out of small woodland ownership and into either large, ownership or non-forest types of uses. And anyway, Jeff has a lot of insight, and he's also trying to work on that. And he's talked with Ben Doimling about that as well. So I think I'd agree he'd be an interesting speaker to help talk about those issues. And those are the people that don't, maybe have a family or don't have a legacy. And when someone passes on and there's no real plan for it, it goes somewhere else. And there's quite a number that, what are the options for them in terms of conservation, longer term conservation, easements or forest trusts or whatever, as well as some other creative ideas that people are coming up with to get other people to engage in forest stewardship, even though it's not a family connection, but it prevents this succession out of a small woodland ownership. So I'd vote for that as a topic to talk about.
I've talked to Jeff Gersh also, and he does have some interesting ideas. I think it might be interesting if he came to pair it with someone else, maybe, because Jeff's sort of looking at it from maybe having a brand new idea about a new something he could set up. And I think that maybe Keola mentioned the Nature Conservancy because they have some program that already exists having to do with small landowners who are looking for a way what to do with their land after they die, where they don't have a family successor or something like that. I can ask Keola about that. Succession is an issue that's popped up from time to time. And I think it was Rick Zen who suggested I look at the ties to the land, which is, I think, a little webinar or pamphlet or something that you can get online that I think is with the extension. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant program that we just actually kind of revived this last month. So that really focuses more on family succession, which that's an issue in itself. There's a lot of challenges there, but alongside of that are folks that don't even have necessarily a family succession that they could come up with.
Well, and then wrapped into that are the people that don't have big enough lands that Forest Legacy or some of the other tribe would be interested in them. But if we start losing 30 acres at a time,
That adds up.
that adds up really fast. Dave? You're muted, Dave.
Two suggestions to piggyback on one of them, on which what Glenn was talking about, is it seems to me that, you know, when you want to learn something, you don't go to one entity. You go to like a consultant that deals with a bunch of different entities, and then they can give you an overview of the pros and cons of each one. I mean, that's what I did for 40 years. And so one idea would be to get someone like Clint Bentz, or someone who's a knowledgeable tax professional that represents a bunch of different ideas, could give an overview of the whole thing about estate planning, you know, family succession, all this business. So someone like that, not necessarily him, but just someone like that, they could give you a broad stroke brush of what's going on. But then secondly, what really drives a lot of people's decisions about their forest land is simply put, is money. And so if you well, I don't know how to do this without, you know, because we're to be an apolitical organization, but nonetheless, politics enters into it. And it would be an interesting discussion to have, whether it's a legislator that's experienced in this, or forest policy analyst, maybe even better, to talk about what are the tipping points when somebody says, hey, it's not worth it to me anymore to do this, because, you know, we've been fighting the whole idea of a severance tax and all this for quite a few years. And really onerous taxing will drive people to the point where they say, I'm just going to sell this and you know, grow or plant out, build houses, whatever they are allowed to do. And so we want to, I think it would be an interesting exercise to find out, okay, what are the various sensitivity areas that we should be talking about and educating ourselves about, so that we can try to, you know, although as an organization, this committee cannot advocate, individuals can. And so that would be something I think that would be, everybody would learn something from.
Teresa? Dave, it feels like Kate and I hadn't even had a chance to move up to our property, and I think a survey came out from OSU asking questions like that. You know, if the tax structure was changed, which would shift, would you keep your land? Would you be more likely to keep it? Glenn, I don't know if you remember anything about that. In this, I think it was pre-fire, so we didn't know a lot about the economics of having a forest, and, you know, we would have needed a large fortune to make that small fortune, and oh well. But I feel like something similar to that, at least the feedback from landowners was solicited, and I don't know whatever became of that. So Glenn, I don't know if you know anything about that. And I don't know that it was extension. I just know they came out of OSU.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular one, although, you know, that's a good question, and I'd be interesting to track down who did that one and what they learned, you know, in an earlier version of that. But it's something to keep thinking about how we approach it. I also agree with David and with others about having this broader scope. And like, even if we were to invite Jeff Gersh, we'd make the theme of the meeting and get other knowledgeable people involved to help be most informative for this group.
That's exactly what I'm thinking too. That Jeff could be a sort of a slice of the story, but who was the person you mentioned on tax issues? Cliff?
Bentz, B-E-N-T-Z.
Uh-huh.
He's probably, at least to my knowledge anyway, probably the foremost timber tax authority in Western Oregon. And he's given webinars and classes and all this. So he's really into it. And maybe he's not interested, but maybe he could recommend somebody that would be of similar caliber that could. But I think if one of our goals is to keep forest land as forest land, this should be a front and center topic, because, you know, it doesn't take much for people to just to throw up their arms and say, you know, I'm moving into Portland, or maybe not Portland, but I'm moving into Eugene, you know, or something.
Yeah.
So you just, I think we can't be afraid of not tackling or at least figuring out this issue.
Clint also does ties to the land kind of succession.
Uh-huh.
He was actually one of the professionals that was came and spoke at the ties to the land workshop we were just part of.
Margaret?
I just wanted to mention that several OSU agents, myself and others, we just got trained on the ties to the land succession training by Tammy Cushings, who is the author of that publication. And I'm about to be taking her tax course. And I did create a page on the new Know Your Forest that we're working on that's all about succession and forest finances. And if I don't, none of you have brought it up, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but Oswa did a series on landowner taxes and succession, and they had videos, and it included people like Clint and Tamara and all of that. And I put all of those webinars onto this new page.
Awesome.
So I'm trying to capture a lot of what I've heard in meetings to make sure that, you know, we have it in one spot, because it can be taxing for landowners to have to go from, you know, to Oswa or Tree Farm or OSU or ODF. So I'm really using that partnership for forestry education webpage to kind of be a landing place for that. But one thing about Clint that's tricky is that he does offer for service, like pay for service things. And so as state agencies, ODF and OFRI, we can't really recommend those like a for service. But you know, that doesn't mean that we can't advertise like recorded trainings that he's already put on. It's just hard for us to, you know, tell people, direct people to somebody that is a paid for service
Although
organization.
he's really good about just doing presentations without selling his own business. So, just because we had him for a couple of different. Actually, that's on the Family Forests of Oregon YouTube channel. That's where that lives, that tax series.
Yes, I saw that and I thought, oh, I bet Kate is familiar with this. He's the go-to webmaster for those organizations.
I'm thinking from the various things I've heard, like that, I like the idea of having a few presenters if we're gonna have this topic, so I could check in with Keola about Jeff Gersh and whatever she meant about a TNHC person. I think it would be interesting if Flint Vance, if you would be willing to simply donate some time to talk to our committee about this. And then I thought the ties with the land material was interesting, and I'm also interested in why it's being rejuvenated right now. Maybe Clint could talk a little bit about that, or maybe you, Glenn, do you know, you could.
People have brought it comes up in woodland owner meetings. It's part of why it's also.
So I'm just wondering if that could be on our agenda too, sort of an update on ties to the land and what's going on there and why. And I don't know who the presenter would be, but as maybe Clint could do it. Glenn, are you someone who knows enough about that to talk
I mean,
about?
I know a fair amount about it, and it is, as Kate said, it's always there. It keeps it's a burning issue. It's so that's why we revive it, because it really, just because Tammy Cushing left, it sort of died down because she was our leader at the time, but it's had several iterations. So actually right now, Lauren Grand is, and Alicia, I think both are leaders on that. And they're the ones that, you know, worked with Tammy and others. And yeah, and Clint is still there for us. I mean, he's at tree school. He's got a full day of 4 classes at our Clackamas Tree School, so he's still available and there for us, which is great.
He's a master woodland manager, so there's a piece of that that's not just the business side of it.
Yeah, we're pretty comfortable having him come and do an education event. And I had another, while I'm here, another topic to bring up, which is, you know, back to the reforestation topic, which I think Joy and Karen were saying is kind of a theme for ODF, but you know, it's still in front of us as this sort of emerging, increasing challenge with reforestation in general, small woodland owners in particular. And then after the post-disturbance, post-fire challenges everyone's having, that could be something we might, feature in our next year. And I, personally, OSU, of course, was heavily involved in trying to help people as much as we can. And we know the story and often the sad stories of, these challenges and what can go wrong. And so we do have this study that we've been doing that Oak Tree's helped fund on the landowner experience after fire. And that would be something that could be part of this. There's also big initiatives going on, like on the east side after the big fires there. Well, there was the big one a couple of years ago, and of course, this last year, and their challenges with reforestation. And there's American Forest, has been working on that and come up with a pretty focused strategy on that on the east side in particular, and they'll probably be turning to the west side. So we might be able to invite somebody from American Forest, like Brian Kittler or Brian Morris, who are regeneration foresters, but also then looking at this big picture issue of how do we help restore the landscapes after disturbance with the increasing difficulty of reforestation. And, it's both a biological and operational challenge, but also the social and political, how do we mobilize our assistance and our partnerships to be more effective in responding to this challenge. So that's another topic I guess I would put out as, a priority. That's good.
So Dave or me. Oh, David?
Just I mentioned this earlier during a different part of the meeting, but just to reiterate, I think it would be worthwhile to have a discussion on the log markets, and we're going to have, potential here to have services of Jake that could talk about the conifer market, and then maybe he could get somebody to talk about the hardwood market, and like I said earlier, talk about what's going on now, but what potentially is contemplated in the future, and what species of hardwoods are being looked at maybe more rigorously than in the past. It would help. I mean, that's another aspect that convey that to the small woodland owner, that it's more than just about Doug fir and cedar, and so that would be something to consider, I think.
Actually, kind of connected to the conversation we were having at lunch about incense cedar and valley pine and some of the things that people are struggling with reforestation. I was thinking, actually tagging on, well, to both, but to what Glenn was saying. I know that I brought it up, I think, last meeting, that compliance monitoring report about reforestation, where the numbers are, it's like 70. The number for compliance was fairly, not low, but concerningly not near 100% for small woodland owners. But it was a binary kind of in compliance, out of compliance. And there seems to be, I think there are more pieces to pick out of some of that. I know that that's somehow we've managed to get onto a forest policy committee for Oswald, partly because I don't know why forest policy just has become interesting to me. But like a few of us are going to, kind of be on the Zoom meeting as they continue talking about that. But that could be another one that would be interesting, looking at reforestation issues. I know that report comes out, it's earlier replantings, but what can drive a seeming non-compliance? Is it just failure to understand the rules, or is it reforestation struggles? There are so many different things, and maybe moving forward, we can kind of, I don't know if we can help change any of how those surveys are put together or how some of that monitoring happens, but yes or no does not leave a lot of area for, well, yes, but, or, and there may be more and more of those issues, because is it species, is it stocking, is it climate change, is it seedling quality? Is it heat domes and seedling quality the year after? But there are a lot of issues on reforestation, so it's bigger than just, make sure you put trees in the ground and it's brown side down.
So are you think this could fit well with the post-disturbance discussion? It seems to me it could.
It could, yeah. I think it's like, there's a lot to it. So anyway, and I don't know who the people would be, but.
So Glenn mentioned a couple names of people who I tried to write down quickly, but I'm not sure I got right. They could do a discussion on post disturbance. Glenn, do you think that they could talk a bit about the degree of success in reforestation and compliance issues?
Well, the compliance monitoring was a separate report. that
Right,
just
yeah.
came out. So that's like a different committee of people, and I do know some of the names of people on that committee. Okay.
Yeah, I guess
That's
the two, I mean, the one thing I mentioned was the OSU study that I'm involved in, the landowner experience after fire. And we have actually Kara Baylog is in Southern Oregon, is the coordinator that's doing a lot of the work on that. So there could be an OSU contingent to that, and I'd be happy to, round that up. But then the other thing I talked about was American Forests, and they've really gotten involved in the recovery around the fires in Southeast Oregon, the Klamath Lake County area from the Bootleg Fire, and then that might be of interest as well. And Brian Kittler and Brian Morris and there's another person I found. So that might be a good angle, but that's a bigger picture. That's not so much focused on small woodland owners, although a lot of the private landowners, they're often ranch landowners out there, not necessarily considering themselves to be small woodland owners, and yet they have a lot of forest lands that were burned, and it's really challenging to recover. And I know American Forest has been really focused on that. But our project is more of a West Side fire project that I was just, even though we did reach out statewide, we had some responses and some insights on the east side.
Just a quick follow-up, let's also not forget it also comes down to money. So I can tell you a number of the folks that I know, they didn't replant because it's going to cost them $3,000, $10,000, whatever it was, and they'd rather pocket that money than replant their trees and just let blackberries grow. And so there's that.
That was one of our findings.
Yes, I'm sure. Glenn, if you could send those names you mentioned, that would be helpful, because does that sound right for putting together the next meeting? We can think about possible presentations there.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. Thanks. And I think on the issue you're mentioning, the compliance and non-compliance, I don't think we came up with who to have speak, or what would be most constructive as the next step in pursuing that topic.
I'd have to find out if it is.
Mike can look into that. Okay.
I was gonna find out whether or not they're ready.
Okay.
I got it.
Okay. I'm writing down this. No, you'll look into that. Okay.
Yeah, Terry Freeze is the one that's been, well, yeah, not to find out.
Okay, so that's a good topic. We had Mauricio at one of our prior meetings. He's not here today, so I'll just mention the idea was to have a presentation on the stewardship economy, the economy of stewardship beyond and novel sources of revenue. In particular, he was talking about biomass and looking to the future in terms of different management styles. And he mentioned Nils Christofferson of Wallowa Resources, possibly an interesting person to talk about that. That's what I made notes of in terms of his presentation. I thought it sounded interesting. Do other people? Yay, nay. Further thoughts on that?
Can you explain that one, or I can't remember what that gist of that was. It sounds interesting, but can you?
Yeah, he wrote. Let me just look here and see if he wrote it down.
Biomass keeps coming up.
Yes, he's mentioned biomass.
I think he was along the context
Oh, yeah.
to do with non-merciable.
This is a little bit the notes, like he mentions products for our communities that are not the typical large scale mills projects. And he was thinking about biomass and thinking that Nils Christofferson of Wallowa Resources, which tends to focus, I think, on sort of a combination of alternate forest practices and ecosystem services, might be an interesting person to talk
It might be interesting to hear from someone from the east side anyway.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll put that as like, because I think we have two pretty good ideas to add to our standard, like, we'll probably want a legislative update at our next meeting, and so we'll have and updates from the department, so we could try and add those two topics we talked about, which is a discussion of tax and succession, and then pursue the idea we had on post disturbance, and then look into small forest landowner compliance and reforestation, as well as Mauricio's idea of stewardship economy.
That seems like a good year.
I'm sorry to talk so much, but I was trying to consolidate a bit. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I gotta check on the post disturbance where that's sitting. And let me check on that one.
Okay, well, of course, I understand that I'm trying to sort of, as I said, queue us up a little on the early side because we meet less frequently. I was thinking the more we can do that in this meeting, more likely it is we'll have time to get speakers.
And were you thinking about post-disturbance reforestation success or the post-disturbance rulemaking?
The post-disturbance, like I have here, like Gary was interested in seeing a discussion of post-disturbance to include how expenses can be covered to assist small landowners. And then I have, my old note, someone else wanted to talk about post-disturbance issues. That's not an issue that I am all that deep in. I'm just trying to carry forward other people's suggestions.
Well, because we had talked, reforestation kept coming up
Yeah,
currently, so.
There's something that is related to post disturbance that is kind of a potential concern, and Mike's aware of this, and it would be worthwhile getting an update on the rules with this, and that's regarding post disturbance and riparian areas. And so riparian areas are considered now to be essentially no touch areas, but if you have a disturbance that is either a life safety disturbance, or let's say something that could be rectified to benefit the conservation objectives or the future biological goals and objectives of what it is you're trying to achieve in your riparian area, those things should be allowed, and the decisions should be able to be made between the stewardship forester and the landowner, or whatever possible entities, in a way that would be reasonably timely, but also make good scientific sense. I mean, and so this notion of a complete hands-off is just kind of goofy. And so I think if we get some update on that and find out how that is going along and what possibilities are, I think that would be very important.
Okay, thanks for rephrasing that.
That's its own issue.
That's yeah. Although
I don't think we're gonna run short of topic.
you don't think what?
I don't think we're running short of topic.
Okay, but yeah.
No, you're doing a great job.
Well, no, I wanted to make sure that, like I said, that we have some ideas for who we can get to speak just ahead of time, just queue it up and I'm hoping to accurately understand what you talk about. Okay, I think I have enough notes, and probably it's okay with you. Heather, Mike, and I can sort of work on thinking about how to move some of these forward and have at least two of them in our agenda for our next meeting, if that seems possible. Okay. Thanks all.
Well done.
Our next and final topic is roundtable, and I know that Kate has topics, and I hope others do too. Hand it over to roundtable. Kate?
I just wanted to mention some dates of things that I know are coming. Because since Amanda's not here, I'll do it for Associated Oregon Loggers. Their convention is this coming Saturday, Friday and Saturday. So, so if you wanted to go to the ladies networking lunch and learn, you could hear about Oregon women in timber and talk about trees, because Diane and I are speaking. Our OWIT annual auction, which raises money for forestry, talk about trees and forestry education, is on February 19th. Logging conference, which has been brought up a few times, is the 20th through the 22nd in Eugene. March 6th, OSWA is participating in it. We're having a lobby day. Given the construction going on at the Capitol, I don't know what that's actually going to look like yet, but just so that that's kind of on people's radar. The Family Forest Convention is going to be June 19th to 21st. So knowing that that's on I think we have a CFF meeting like the 18th, and then the 19th to the 21st is that. So a day, some tours and some education on the Friday, and then the Tree Farmer of the Year tour at Pam and Jock Dalton's place. So it's gonna be, I think, kind of basically rooted, I guess, in some ways at Scout Lodge in Philomath. I had mentioned kind of that one of the things OTFS is looking at right now, or our landowner journey committee, Dave and I are both on that, but this sort of potentially some kind of program to sort of reach out to the under 10 acre kind of folks. I think we may start gauging some interest in starting to get a list of that, maybe at Tree School, which I'm not going to steal Len's thunder about Tree School coming up. And then my final two small things were a question of when or do we ever update our information on the CFF page, like what our terms are and different things, because it's all still saying that none of us should still be here. But is there a process for any of those kinds of updates, and do we do those? In terms of bio stuff, just because things do change over the course of 3 to 6 years. And then the last one, you may or may not remember that at our presentation to the board, I had invited the board to come to our property if they wanted to for a tour. And since then, I've been in touch with Mike and Wendy, just so doing it formally. I had talked to Cal about it, but that's kind of, and but casually mentioned it to like Heath Curtis when I saw him at something else, and then just to Ben, and he was like going, no, he kind of thinks that's an interesting idea. So just sort of still putting that out there. However, we do that as a formal thing through CFF, whether it's one of their locations for a tour or a couple of them visiting casually. Okay, I will shut up now. Any more roundtable topics?
Well, it almost goes without saying that Tree School Clackamas is the big thing coming for us, many of us. And it's all set. The catalog is out. It's in the mail to 15,000 woodland owners, and it's online. And so many of you are all involved. Thank you. So yeah, just hope we just fill up. We've got the exhibitors and sponsors are all, in good number and filling the exhibit hall. We're figuring out where to squeeze in more, and ODF has a strong presence, and it's all coordinated, both state and local, and instructors as well as the exhibit hall resources. So that's going to be great, and that's kind of the big thing going on for us in Extension. We also have our newsletters, as David alluded to that. We have monthly newsletters and such, and I was kind of interested in what all the discussion about kind of a concerted partnership effort with the landowner outreach to those that are unengaged. That's a perennial topic for us. Something else I'll mention is that the Extension Forestry Natural Resources Group, as many of you know, we have this big statewide planning process where we put our heads together as a statewide group and try to boil down what are the big issues that we can work on together and get outside of each of our little silos, things that require teamwork based on needs and issues that just rise up that we tackle. So many of our big programs arise from that. But I am hosting that meeting in Clackamas this summer in July. And as part of that, we put together, we huddle with ourselves and with our partners and really work on what are the needs and issues, and then what might emerge where Extension can take leadership in projects with our partners as well. So we'll probably be communicating with some of you and inviting some of you to help us with that. planning session, which is now going to be like 5 days. So we've revised our planning process to make it all one big session, and travel on either end of that 5 days, but then probably a good 3.5 days of work on that, including engagement with our stakeholders and partners. So that'll be on my mind as well. And lots of fun things going on at Hopkins Demonstration Forest. We have the trainer program around big leaf maple sap and syrup production that starts at the end of the month. We have that Professor Eric Jones at OSU who's been leading the charge on that and funding a lot of landowner development of commercial capability as well as demonstration sites. We have at Hopkins Demonstration Forest, we have a fully sourced and supplied big leaf maple tapping demonstration with 30 trees tapped and a line and a pump to suck the sap out even more. And in fact, it's the pump is going right now because we've had this cold snap with these sunny days. It's perfect big leaf maple tapping weather. So we got 150 gallons last time, and I think we'll probably get more this week. And then we're gonna have this train the trainer workshop for other folks that's already set to go and full of participants for the end of the month. So that's an interesting thing. But yeah, that's top of my mind.
Thank you. Giving a pause for anyone else who wants to speak up. We've covered a lot of territory, so good job. And I think with no further roundtable, I just want to thank everyone again for being here. Jake, in particular, thanks for your interest in the committee. And we'll move forward procedurally on that like we described. And thank you all, and I hereby adjourn today's CFF meeting.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.